While you slept last night, it came. The snows of Christmas. These are the first pictures of Christmas 1989. Shortly after midnight, with the temperature about 20 degrees, there was just enough moisture in the air to make it happen.
Throughout the Cold War, Romania had been a socialist country in Eastern Europe. However, it took a different course than its Soviet Union allies. There till 1965, when Romania was controlled by two Joseph Stalin followers, George Dij and Nicolae Ceausescu. Nicolae Ceausescu, communist official who dominated Romania from 1965 through 1989, when he was toppled and executed in a revolution. He first commanded the Ministry of Agriculture following the communists' complete adherence towards the authority in Romania in 1947, and worked as a deputy Ministry of Armed Forces with the position of general from 1950 to 1954. Ceausescu was finally ranked as second within the hierarchy of the party and was prominent in the committee and secretary under George Dij. After George Dij passed away in March 1965, his replacement Nicolae Ceausescu upheld his independence. Nicolae Ceausescu pursued this strategy, condemning the Soviet response to the Prague Spring. His fame grew as a result, both in Romania and throughout the world. Ceausescu reinforced his control in 1974 by establishing an executive presidency, in which he would hold for the following 15 years. Ceausescu's elections to the head of state significantly strengthened his authority and permitted him to govern as the country's official dictator. Ceausescu openly expressed enormous and unrealistic nationalist ideals. He imposed agony and misery on the Romanian people via his social and economic policies. Through over 24 years, Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu governed Romania nearly jointly, spouting strong communist ideology while enjoying opulent lives as the Romanian people faced the horrors and cruelties that were frequent elements in life in the communist countries of Eastern Europe. However, things were shifting in 1989. During the whole historic year, the people of those countries disobeyed Soviet tyranny, as seen by the symbolic fall of the Berlin Wall in November. Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany replaced their communist leadership one after the other, mostly peacefully. In Romania, this is not the case. Life underneath a communist tyrant like Ceausescu is portrayed in the West as a lengthy nightmare of terror, starvation, and police violence. Individuals were hardly communist apparatchiks nor descendants, as like most Romanians handled the institution as best as they could, just seeking to live life peacefully. Matters were excellent in Romania through 1970s, but by the 1980s, Ceausescu resolved to settle Romania's IMF obligations by shipping as much as possible. It became difficult to find even the most basic essential life. Food was subsidized, and everything had huge lineups. Several aspects of life were unusual to say the least. Relatively fewer people had vehicles, but public transit was readily available and reasonably priced. The electricity went off at 11 a.m. and brought it back at 5 p.m. It was also cold, with the heater only coming on occasionally. Also, kids weren't informed about the secret police, re-education prisons, work camps, or the daily struggles families faced in an attempt to place food on the table. Furthermore, most Romanians were only given half a loaf of bread each day, so they were unaware of Ceausescu's lavish lifestyle. At the moment, a warm wave of propaganda filled upbringing, giving it shape and significance. Romanian females were badly affected. Ceausescu's goal was to stop the drop in birth rates and grow Romania's population from 25 million to 30 million. That generated one of the 20th century's most widespread attempts at social engineering. Romanian females were subjected to mandatory periodic examinations by state doctors, called the menstrual police. Pregnant women were documented and monitored until finalization. Women who lost were checked for possible abortion, and women who were unable to birth were questioned about their personal lives and sexual practices. His secret police continued to exercise severe restrictions on freedom of expression and media. In 1966, Ceausescu signed Order 770, which essentially prohibited contraception and abortion in order to enhance the population of Romania. In 982, Ceausescu commanded the sale of most of the country's agricultural and industrial goods, with the aim of paying the massive international debt by the government via its poorly managed industrial enterprise. The consequent excessive food, energy, medical, and other essential needs reduced living conditions and increased unease dramatically. Has a plan to redevelop hundreds of Romanian villages and shift their people in so-called agro-technical centers, amongst other great and unpractical projects. Ceausescu as well as his cohorts enjoyed lavish circumstances while the Romanian people struggled. Ceausescu possessed a number of properties around the country, most of which were huge palaces or estates kept by the servants. Ceausescu has loaned extensively to establish an infrastructure of oil refining plants to promote Romania as a major European power. Romania was stuck with a huge external debt when these facilities could not make the promised earning. In order to pay off the debt, Ceausescu sold its own foodstuff, industrial goods, and power. Cultural failures and deadly earthquakes only increased their sorrow in the mid-1970s. On Christmas Day 1989, the Ceausescus were held into Asaini Square at quite a military installation outside Ceausescu and shot following what can be described as heinously performed criminal procedure in a mob court. The photographs were shown on Romanian and international television, although it is true that Ceausescu was extremely ruthlessly authoritarian tyrant whose rule brought suffering to his own countrymen while he enjoyed luxuriously with his wife. The method of their end stunned a watching world. The army was brought in probably on Ceausescu's instructions, and though that has been subsequently challenged, it is what the demonstrators assumed, and therefore the army was attacked. It had been unnecessary overreaction, but the city was on fire. State of emergency had been established, and troops have invaded the streets. Troopers opened fire on protesters who broke the curfew. Many people were murdered and many more were gravely injured. There were several arrests. On December 21st, he intended to deliver a public statement to the people. Extremely devoted loyalists were invited, and others were reportedly threatened with dismissal if they did not exhibit apparent support as he spoke. About 100,000 people assembled, which was festooned with red flags and giant images of the dictator. The audience, on the other hand, refused to play along. There were shouts and yells of Timorosa.